If we look at the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, that incredibly long time span of about 2,200 years from the founding of Rome to the fall of Constantinople and its last remnants, we immediately are amazed about a few things. First, how long it took Rome to conquer all these territories and become the undisputed superpower of the Mediterranean, and how long the Roman Empire remained stable. But equally fascinating is how quickly then things started falling apart and how many recoveries there were. We find it also equally fascinating how large the Roman army was and for how long hundreds of thousands of men would serve in that disciplined military institution and for hundreds of years. And when the West fell, we are equally fascinated by how many times the Eastern Roman Empire rebounded from impending doom, dragging out its fall over a time span of 1,000 years. So can we put all these metrics into charts? How would the rise and fall of the Roman Empire look when we would put it into charts? The territory, the army size, the population of the empire, the population of the largest cities. Let's start with the Western Roman Empire and its 1,229-year-long time span, and in the next video we'll have a separate look at the Eastern Roman Empire. One, land area. How did the land area of the Roman Empire evolve over time? That is a question that I have always asked myself, as it would be really interesting to see all the ups and downs over time, the fast rise, the long stability, the sharp drops and the many rebounds. Almost like a stock market chart of a company that sees a steep rise but then eventually enters decline and goes bankrupt. We could see the Roman Empire as an analogous construct, but of course on a much larger macro scale. So let's look at the chart. The city of Rome was founded in 753 BC, and for quite a few hundred years the area that Rome controlled was really only confined to the city of Rome itself. It would be only as late as 326 BC, more than 4 centuries after the founding, that Rome would now hold the area of Latium, an area of roughly 10,000 square kilometers. In 264 BC, Rome conquered central and lower Italy, expanding its size to 130,000 square kilometers. In 200 BC, Sicily, Illyria and southern Spain were conquered. Now Rome held 360,000 square kilometers. This is already quite remarkable. It took Rome over 400 years to conquer only 10,000 square kilometers, but it took only 126 further years to conquer 36 times as much territory. Rome had entered some sort of exponential growth phase. By 146 BC, the Roman Republic had conquered the Carthaginian Empire and Greece, thus expanding it to 800,000 square kilometers. By 133 BC, it had crossed the 1 million square kilometer threshold. In the last century of the Republic then, Western Anatolia, Spain, Syria, Egypt, Eastern Anatolia and Gallia were conquered, expanding it to 2.75 million square kilometers. And then, under the reign of the first Emperor Augustus, Rome had reached a size of 3.4 million square kilometers, adding Germania and Mauritania. So let's recapitulate. It took Rome about 430 years to only conquer the surroundings of the city of Rome itself, an area of 10,000 square kilometers, the size of a square of 100 times 100 kilometers in size. But in the next 326 years, so in 100 years less time, Rome conquered an area 340 times larger. That is insane. It went from 10,000 square kilometers to 3.4 million square kilometers in 326 years. In the first century of the now Roman Republic turned empire, the territorial gains continued. Germania was lost again, but instead Pannonia, Thrace and Britannia were added by 50 AD, then Armenia, Brittany and southern Germania by 83 AD, and then finally Dacia and Mesopotamia in 117 AD under the legendary Emperor Trajan. Now Rome had reached its peak size of 5 million square kilometers. Just as a comparison, that is a bit more than half the size of the current United States of America. But we can already see that Rome grew a lot slower under the Empire than during the Republic. In the previous 117 years under the Republic, the territory had tripled in size. But in the Empire, in the same time span, it didn't even manage to double, from 3 to 5 million square kilometers. So it became increasingly difficult to conquer new territories, which is of course logical, since conquering ever larger land areas would mean an exponential increase in men required to pacify and to protect these newly conquered territories. And hence, the age of stagnation began, or stability depending on how you see it. From 117 to 395 AD, for almost 3 centuries, the Roman Empire would remain almost constant in size. Sure, some territories were lost or given up, such as Dacia or the Agri Decumates in Lower Germania, but apart from that, there was a remarkable continuity. But then the partition came, that giant disaster of the Roman Empire, something that was never meant to happen. And since the West found itself with the poorer provinces and the worst geography, and often in rivalry with the East, it didn't survive long under the relentless and brutal pressure of countless Germanic tribes. At the time of the partition, the Western Roman Empire was slightly larger at 2.3 million square kilometers, and the East at about 2.1. But in a time span of only 91 years, the Western Roman Empire was no more. There were small periods of stabilization, such as under Constantius III, and a brief rebound under the legendary Emperor Maiorianus. But unfortunately this was short-lived, and not long later the Western Roman Empire collapsed. And if you are like me, a total Rome nerd, or Romaboo as some people like to say, and I think that you are, or else you probably wouldn't be watching this video, then you might be interested in the incredible rings and other Roman accessories which the SPQR Shop is building. They make legionary rings, they make rings with different themes, they even make coin replicas, statues, pendants, attributes and terracottas. And the most incredible thing is that they handcraft every single piece. That's right, this is really high quality handcrafted material. There's really no better present for yourself or someone you know who might be a Rome fan. I put the link to their shop in the video description and into the pinned comment, and with this link you can now even get a 20% rebate for every purchase. I repeat, a 20% price reduction for every purchase from the SPQR Shop, which is just an absolutely insane offer, and you can only get it here via the Maiorianus link, because let me tell you, the people from SPQR Shop also are absolute fans of the heroic Emperor Maiorianus. So go and check out their incredible assortment. There will be certainly also something for you. 2. Army size. So what about the size of the army? It is of course again difficult to get precise numbers, but there exist many estimates by many scholars, and most agree that the maximum army size was between 400 to 600,000 men. Let us then take the median value, 500,000. Then this is how the chart of the rise and fall of the Roman army would look until the fall of the Western Roman Empire. We can see that in 400 BC the army size was really small, maybe just 10,000 strong. By 200 BC it had grown to over 100,000, and by the time of Augustus, around the year 0, we were at 350,000 men. The number kept increasing in the following centuries. Over 400,000 in the 1st century, then of course a brutal dip due to the Antonine plague, then a recovery reaching 450,000 in the mid-200s, then another brutal dip due to the Cyprian plague, and finally reaching 500,000 in the late 200s, in the age of the Tetrarchy. Then it remained constant for a while, but then came the splitting between East and West, and there were also losses due to the civil wars between East and West in the 4th century. So by the year 400, the West's army size had fallen to 250,000, only half of the peak in the late 200s. And then with the huge disasters of the 400s, the barbarian invasions and many civil wars and loss of territory and hence loss of tax revenue, it was just not possible anymore for the Western Roman Empire to upkeep such a large army. And it just fell apart quickly. There was the brief resurgence under Maiorianus from 458 to 460, but this unfortunately did not last long, And just 26 years later, after the fall of the kingdom of Syagrius in 486 AD, when the last Western Roman remnant state fell, there was officially no Western Roman army anymore. 3. Population of the Roman Empire. While estimating the land area and army size was already a possibly quite imprecise business with a lot of guesswork by even the scholars who reconstructed these numbers, sources by the way in the description, you can already guess that the population is even harder to estimate. The increase in population was very likely proportional to the conquered territory, which means that the larger the Roman Empire grew, the more people of course lived in it. And when it again began shrinking, so would the population shrink. We would see a steady rise until the reign of Augustus, when it reached 45 million people. The peak of the Roman Empire's population is estimated to have been between 55 to 75 million people, and I always like to take the median value, so that 65 million people seems like a reasonable number. Of course, not long later, Mesopotamia was given up and the Roman Empire shrank, so that of course also the number of inhabitants shrank. The first big dip would come in the 160s AD, when the Antonine Plague killed possibly 10% of the population of the empire, and a second big dip came in the 250s AD with the Cyprian Plague and the devastating civil wars. Then the empire's population slowly recovered, but it never again reached the peak population of 65 million. In 395, just before the final split into an eastern and a western half, the population was probably 56 million people. The Western Empire had 22 million, while the East had 34 million. Of course, the West fell not long later, and so this number quickly went down to zero. But of course that doesn't mean that all people died, only that nobody lived in the Roman Empire anymore because it ceased to exist. And the population of course followed the loss of territory. And so by 486 AD, with the fall of the kingdom of Syagrius, nobody lived in the Western Roman Empire anymore, since it officially did not exist anymore as its own state. Salve and hello dear friends of late Roman history, it's me Sebastian, the creator and the person behind Maiorianus. I just wanted to take a few seconds to thank each and everyone who is supporting Maiorianus in any form. I really thank you so much, and it's really heartwarming for me to see how many people are equally as fascinated as I am with late Roman history. Thank you so much. As you know, Maiorianus is one of the very few channels on YouTube dedicated only to late Roman history. And as you also know, this is a super niche topic, which unfortunately very often doesn't get a lot of love from the YouTube algorithm. I therefore wanted to ask if you could support Maiorianus via a YouTube membership by clicking the join button below the video, or via a Patreon membership, and you can find the link to Patreon in the video description below. Your support and your support only is what makes Maiorianus possible, and I really need your support in order to keep Maiorianus a channel about late Roman history, and not to chase views and YouTube ad revenue and to transform Maiorianus into a general history channel. We don't want that, so I thank you so much for your support and for every new supporter in order to keep Maiorianus a channel about the late Roman Empire. Because as we all know, it is a super underrepresented topic in history. Thank you again for your support. Majorian himself, I think, would be proud. Bene valete, friends of late Roman history, and back to the video. 4. Population of Rome. Looking at the population of the Roman Empire is of course interesting, but so is the population of Rome itself, the capital city. It too would mostly follow the fortunes of the empire. As long as the empire rose, so did Rome rise. But as soon as the empire started shaking, so did the population of Rome start to fall. Here we can see the population of Rome over time. Starting at 0 in 800 BC, since Rome didn't exist yet, it climbed steadily after its founding in 753 BC, reaching 100,000 people in 350 BC and 200,000 in 300 BC. Then, as the Roman Republic conquered more territory, so did Rome's glory and size grow. And already in 50 BC, in the time of Julius Caesar, Rome already had reached a staggering 1 million inhabitants. And it would stay there for a remarkably long time, namely for almost 400 years. The first hit came when the capital was shifted to Constantinople. Many opportunists left Rome for the new capital. But still, even by 400 AD, the old capital was still glorious and still had 800,000 inhabitants. But then came the sack of 410, and even worse, the loss of Africa in the 430s, the breadbasket of the empire. The grain ships didn't come as often anymore, and so 1 million people simply could not be sustained. Thus, by 450 AD, Rome had only half of its peak population, namely 500,000. But then in 455, the city was sacked another time by the Vandals, and then only 17 years later, another time by the traitor of the Roman Empire, Ricimer. So of course many people fled the city because of these disasters, and thus by 500 AD, it would only have been between 100 to maybe 150,000 inhabitants left at Rome, but certainly not more than 200,000 as an upper limit. But then came the Gothic Wars, and that was it for Rome. They really broke Rome's neck, and by 600 AD, only 30,000 people remained in the once glorious city. Only 3% of its peak population. So Rome had for almost 400 years 1 million inhabitants, but it took only 200 more years, half the time, to reduce its population to only 3% of its peak population. Insane. And so the Middle Ages had arrived even in the old venerable city. But luckily Rome recovered, and nowadays many more people live in Rome than in ancient times, and luckily we can go there and see many of the monuments still standing. And so, dear friends of late Roman history, we can see that the Roman Empire has quite some fascinating statistics and charts to offer. Of course, one could certainly find many more interesting numbers for future charts, maybe the gold and silver content of coins over time, or the number of military victories versus losses over time, and so on and so forth. But maybe those will be stats for another such video in the future. And please like and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And I would of course also like to thank everyone who is supporting Maiorianus in any form, be it through Patreon, YouTube membership, or through a PayPal donation. Thank you for supporting Maiorianus so that I can keep this a channel about late Roman history. And if you want to learn more about Constantinople, you can watch this video here in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn more about ancient Rome's incredible population density, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.